Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 37,979 people from 160 countries and is supported by 527 organisations. We have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Do join us as a member, which you can do via our website or volunteering or donating. We have a common understanding in this webinar because the majority of us have signed the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. And anybody who hasn't done so, if you could have a look at the declaration and sign it if you agree with it, because that really helps. And it helps us be a sort of community together. Right, so today, I'm really pleased to say we have Elizabeth Chesak from USA. She spent 7 years in the gender identity cult before desisting in 2019. She currently serves as Chief of Staff for WDI USA and is the coordinator of their Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Caucus. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming. And over to you.
I'll be talking about my story very briefly, how I got here. And then I'll be talking about why I wanted to start the caucus. And I'll be talking about our projects, both past and upcoming. So I had a really happy childhood. I feel very lucky. And one thing that I'm really grateful for is that my parents didn't push gender roles on me or on my brother. It wasn't, girls can't do this, girls have to do this. They let me just be me. So I was a very happy tomboy. I always had my nose in a book. I remember reading about the suffragettes at maybe age 8. It was very basic. It was definitely a child's understanding of feminism, but I did have that baseline understanding that there were women before me who hadn't had all the rights that I would have now, and that they had fought very hard to win those rights. So I did have that coming into all this gender mess. Around 2010, I started using the internet pretty heavily. I would have been 14 years old at this time. And then in 2012, I started to use it even more heavily. Parents tried to monitor what I was doing online, but I would just go around them. So I don't fault them for that at all. I would try to go around them, setting time limits on me. And in 2012, I was, of all things, I was doing a Harry Potter roleplay, and there were a lot of other young women in this online who called themselves boys or who called themselves non-binary. And a few years prior to that, I had been coming to the realization that I was a lesbian. And I remember sitting there thinking about all these other girls who said that they were boys. And I remember thinking, maybe the reason I'm attracted to women is that I was meant to be born in a man's body. And it really just spiraled from there. So it really just spiraled from there. I can get very fixated on things, which can be great if I'm working on projects, but not so great other times. I spent 7 years trying to figure this out. And it's pseudoscientific, so this is the genderbread person. I took this completely seriously because I was a teenager at the time and I didn't know any better. And I would try to figure out what my identity was. I tried to figure out why I didn't feel like a woman. Now I understand that it's not a feeling. There's so many nebulous identities. They'll say, demigirl is if you feel like a girl, but not all the way. Well, what does that mean? That's nonsense. And I spent all this time just going around in circles trying to figure out what it meant. And every time I thought I had it figured out, I would hear of another identity and I would be like, oh, maybe that's me, because they're based on regressive stereotypes. They're based on the idea that, if you want short hair, you're somehow not a woman. They're based on feelings, and your feelings are going to fluctuate throughout your life. This always makes me laugh. What is a woman? Anyone that identifies as a woman. What are they identifying with women? And I would just go around in circles. trying to understand this and feeling like there was something wrong with me that I didn't understand this. I remember hearing about, I remember reading the stories of what I now understand to be men who call themselves women, and they would talk about their girlhood and their womanhood, and I just couldn't relate because their stories were about stealing their sister's underwear or painting their nails and just feeling super girly, and I was like, that's not me. I don't relate to that. And I thought that that meant that I wasn't a woman. And now I understand that I didn't relate because those are either straight men with a fetish or they're gay men who hate themselves. And that's sad, but that doesn't make them women. And so I tried to figure out what it meant to be a woman. I felt stupid. I thought I was missing something. I was trying to educate myself. I was trying to keep an open mind. So this is a quote that I found very enlightening and very helpful when I read it. Often when I discuss these matters in regular life, my statements are met with stares of incredulity. It is very difficult to get one's head around what is happening because it all sounds so astonishing. People often say things like, I am trying to make sense of it all. My response to this understandable expression is typically, you are trying to make sense out of something that does not make sense. You are using critical thinking and intelligence to make sense out of something that cannot be made sense of. You are not the crazy one here. And that's The Abolition of Sex by Karadansky. I found that really eye-opening. I'm currently working on a piece that kind of talks about that, and it builds on Amy Sousa's work about trusting your instincts. But I just spent the better part of a decade thinking that I was missing something, that I was not understanding properly what gender identity was, and now I understand it to be pseudoscientific, misogynistic nonsense. But I really did try very earnestly to understand something that I now realize is nonsensical. I was going in circles. So all along, there were little glimpses of sanity, I guess. I remember being in college, and this came up. I don't know if it was this exact video, but it was a Magdalene Burns video. It came up in the recommended sidebar on YouTube. And I remember watching all of, 10 or 15 seconds and clicking away because I knew that she was transphobic. And I think on some level I was terrified that I would agree. This was the summer of 2018. I don't remember exactly which Pride this is. Like London Pride, I think. But that's Julia Long and Angela Wilde. And that was another moment where it came across on the news, some news article, and I didn't fully understand what they were talking about, why they were upset. But I think on some level, I saw that it took a lot of courage to stand up against the tide like that. And I really respected that. And that was summer of 2018, so summer before my senior year of college. As you can see, I was pretty miserable. I think this was 2016, maybe 2017. I had sunk into a severe depression. I spent a lot of time looking up different identities and looking into different surgeries that I thought I might want, and just feeling despair because I didn't really want those surgeries, but I thought maybe they would make me happy. We're told in this cult that if you're sad and you cut your body parts off, it will bring you peace. And so I was feeling very lonely at this time. I only ever told, I would say 1.5 people, because I went in more depth with one friend than I did the other, but I told very few people. And both of those women that I told have now undergone double mastectomies, and I haven't heard from them in a few years. But like my parents didn't know about this until it was all over. And around 2017, 2018-ish, I remember looking around a classroom, maybe 20 of us in total, and there were 7 of us who claimed to have gender dysphoria or to identify out of their sex in some way. And I remember looking around and thinking, if if trans is this rare thing, why are nearly half of my classmates calling themselves that? Like, the gears were starting to turn in my head that there's something up with this. I'm just gonna check out what these evil TERFs are saying on their blogs, and I'm one of them. So, fall of 2018, my senior year, I started to read things like Feminist Current. I read Fourth Wave Now. I read a lot of detransition blogs. I'm trying to think what else. Magdalene Burns, etc. I guess I'm very curious, and I'm also a little bit stubborn. So if you tell me don't read that, I'll go and read that, because again, the curiosity. So I had this idea that I would just go on TERF blogs and read what they had to say, and I had this delusional idea that if I could only understand their arguments better, then I could have better rebuttals to their arguments. But instead, I ended up agreeing with them. And it was just this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, because that was my social life. Most of my friends identified out of their sex. I had mostly female friends. I did have a few male friends, and they were starting to identify out of their sex as well. And those who didn't were generally supporters of it all, cheering it on. So I knew that it was going to cost me my social life. I would read, Feminist Current and whatnot, and think, well, maybe so-and-so wasn't really a boy, but maybe I really am. And so it was slowly peeling away the layers that no one can be anything other than the sex they are. And I came across this picture of Posey Parker, and I realized that it really is as simple as women being an adult human female. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter how you dress, who you love, what kind of job you have. It doesn't matter if you love being a woman or if you wish you weren't. Sorry, that's your biological reality. Very, very quickly, I left it all behind. I want to say in a matter of weeks after I found this picture. And I've had the opportunity to tell her thank you in person, so that was wonderful. But yeah, from there, I just read even more. I just did a deep dive. I started to see it in a whole new light. I started to see it as a social contagion, and I realized that it wasn't just me. I felt so alone for years, but this was happening not only across country, but around the world. I started to see it in the context of other misogynistic practices. So, FGM, breast ironing, foot binding. I started to see, breast implants and double mastectomies are two sides of the same misogynistic coin. And these were things that I had never considered before. These were things that hadn't been taught in college. So I was originally set to graduate with 3 degrees. One of them would have been gender studies, and I quit that partway through my senior year because I was starting to realize that it was all nonsense. But anyway, 4 years of quote-unquote gender studies, and they hadn't critically analyzed the topic of gender identity at all, because of course not. I think these degree programs are like factories pushing out more cult members. Let me see. And then in around 2020, I started to speak about this on social media, and I did lose probably 90% of my friends. And I've made wonderful friends since then, which I'm very grateful for. But that was difficult, and there's a lot of grief still of friends lost to the cult. I mean, I can't get them out of there. They have to come to that realization for themselves that this isn't the way to happiness, that they're living in defiance of reality, I suppose. That you can't hide from your female reality. And I hope that they accept themselves someday, but I don't know. I can't hurry that process along. And this leads me to starting the caucus. So I started the caucus because I love this org. I love WDI USA, and I think we do amazing work. It did seem like a bit of a gap in the programming that we didn't have anything for desisted and detransitioned women And just in general, I'm very interested in bringing more young women into the movement. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more women and men, for what it's worth, waking up and realizing that they've made a mistake, that this is not based in reality, and hopefully my friends will be among them. But I wanted to have a kind of landing place for them when they realize that this isn't working for them. So it's okay because you canceled out of the slide, but the logo includes a little lizard, and that's a symbol that you'll see very often on Twitter in detransitioner bios, because some lizards can regrow their tails. So the symbol represents growth and new life after loss. So the mission of the WDI USA Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Caucus is to advocate for women and girls who previously believed they had a so-called gender identity by sharing our own stories and learning from the women who came before us. Between 2009 and 2018, there was a 4,000% increase in the number of children and young people claiming to be the opposite sex in the UK, with many of those individuals undergoing experimental cross-sex hormone therapy and body-altering surgeries. Those subjected to this medicalization may face permanent infertility, among other lifelong irreversible health complications. Many of the older feminists we talked to express that had they been born in this era, they would very likely have been pushed to attempt to change their sex in response to their nonconformity with sex-based stereotypes. They want to help us because they see themselves in us. This cross-generational solidarity has had a profound impact on our development as radical feminists. The ideology of gender identity, in addition to annihilating the sex-based rights of women and girls, alienates women and girls from one another by encouraging them to interpret their experiences through the lens of an ever-expanding list of made-up identities, rather than through the lens of women as a sex class. The damage this has done to the women's liberation movement is huge, but some of us are pushing back. Through writing, videos, and speaking engagements, we will share our stories and increase our understanding of them through a radical feminist lens. It is our hope that by amplifying the voices of those who deprogrammed from gender identity, we will contribute to the dismantling of this ideology. I was told that you all hated us, and instead I found this wonderful group of women who said, no, if I were born 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, this would be me. It comes from a place of caring. It comes from a place of deep understanding. At the conference in Atlanta, Georgia, that we're having later this year, it will be September 20th through the 22nd. One of the panels that I organized is an intergenerational panel. So it's got women from a variety of generations talking about their experiences, in conversation with one another. So that's been big for me. There are currently 3 of us on the caucus, and we're onboarding a 4th member and very much learning as we go. The next project that I want to talk about, and this was a big one. So our first big project was Celine's story. So Celine is one of the members of the caucus. Here, I don't know if it's in the chat. Okay. And Celine's story, we'll put the link later so you can read it in full, which I really encourage you to. But it's this beautiful long-form essay about her experience, and more specifically how Jamie Reed, who was the whistleblower at the St. Louis, Missouri Children's Hospital and their gender medicine program, an article about Jamie Reed woke her up to what was happening to others. She thought that, again, this had just happened to her. She had been pulled into this cult as a child, and she read an article about Jamie Reed and started to realize that this was so much bigger than her. And I wanted to read a very short snippet. So she says, I entered college very open about the fact that I was female but wanted to be a man. I was on every transgender student panel and did my best to educate everyone on the intricacies of people like me. I got a large tattoo to mask my breasts, thinking I'd never be able to afford a mastectomy. At the appointment, the tattoo artist asked me, her deaf client, "How do you sign 'My body is amazing'?" I showed her, and she turned it into a dance. It was the dance of another woman who had struggled her whole life to love her body. I had begun to love mine, but was still obsessed with not looking completely like either sex. And then further down, a few days later in my dorm room, seeing my new chest unbandaged for the first time, I could hardly remember having breasts. I thought this meant it was the right thing to do. In hindsight, it was trauma. I was 21 and had no idea that my breasts would not grow back if I stopped testosterone. Prior to the operation, I told my therapist I might one day have a child and want to breastfeed my baby, but we never followed up on that thread. So it's just, I love it. I think it's a beautiful essay. It's heartbreaking. The ending always gets me, but I am so proud of her for sharing her story. So that was a major project that we worked on. Another project involved, and this is another case where I can put links, we sent a letter to the editor into the New York Times in response to an article by Pamela Paul. The article was titled "Debate Over Transgender Care." Again, I'll put the link in the chat. It's a pretty short piece. It mostly cites a survey that Women's Declaration International USA conducted. So a survey of a little over 1,000 registered voters reported that when asked what adults should do when female children say they are boys, non-binary, or something else other than girls, just 12% of respondents, including 17% of Democrats, thought they should seek immediate medical intervention for a 15-year-old, and only 7%, including 11% of Democrats, supported immediate medical intervention for an 8-year-old. So what we are arguing in that letter is that there is a leftist feminist critique of gender identity ideology, because I think that often gets overlooked. And that was exciting. It was the first time our organization had been published in the pages of the New York Times. And I plan to continue sending them letters. Lauren Levy of the Lesbian Caucus and I jointly wrote the letter, but I don't think that one will be published, but we'll keep at it. And then the next project, we wrote a Desisted and Detransitioned Women's Bill of Rights. If you Google this, you might come up with one from the organization Do No Harm, and it is a good Bill of Rights. We wanted to make one that was radical feminist in nature. So here, let me scroll down. I don't want to read the whole thing, but it just goes through what rights we need. So here we go. Whereas desisted and detransitioned women who are lesbians have been the target of a form of conversion therapy that seeks to construct a closet out of their own bodies. Whereas girls and women have been targeted with the propaganda of gender identity ideology by innumerable public and private institutions. Whereas so-called gender-affirming care is a euphemism for the destruction of healthy organs in the service of a deeply misogynistic or aggressive ideology, etc. Desisted and detransitioned women are frequently ignored, dismissed, or derided by their clinicians and the general public when attempting to tell their stories or seek redress for their injuries. And then for the resolved clauses, we talk about how women and girls have the right, consistent with Article 1 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, to grow up free from the ideology of so-called gender identity, which is misogynistic and pseudoscientific. Desisted and detransitioned women have the right to tell their stories, which includes providing testimony in support of bills that seek to ban such practices without fear of violence or recrimination, consistent with Articles 4 and 5 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, etc. There's a line here, where is it, that I thought was really important. Resolved that there is no point at which a detransitioned woman ceases to be a woman, regardless of the ways in which her body has been altered, because there is no wrong way to be a woman. And that's just really big for me, because part of it is hoping that my friends come back. Part of it is just hoping that all these lost women come back. There is no point at which you're too far gone. I really treasure the moments I'm thinking of some women I now consider my friends, but when I was starting to first come to radical feminist events, they told me, "Welcome home, sister." So there's never a point at which you're too far gone. You'll always be a woman. When I was in the cult, that was distressing to me, this idea that I could never escape womanhood, and I didn't end up altering my body in any way. So I'm very happy for that. I'm very grateful. But even if I had, there's no way to escape being a woman. You might be an altered woman, but you're still a woman, and we're so happy to have you back. Some of us just take a bit of a twisty, turny path to reach acceptance of ourselves. And then, as far as upcoming projects, we do plan to do some video interviews. So this was an idea that I got from Lorraine Nolan, who is the coordinator of the Black Women's Caucus of WDI USA. I love that she does video interviews. And then at the upcoming convention, which again is September 20th through the 22nd in Atlanta, Georgia, we will have a panel discussing our experiences and some projects and where we'd like to go from here.